And below at the very bottom of Airedale, there's a YouTube link, and I clicked that, and that's when I got to it.
That's what I did too eventually, because I couldn't get on that unless.
Yeah, because the other one just,
It wasn't working.
no. I don't have the projector set up because we sort of don't need it tonight, so it's just me and the laptop. That. Do-do-do-do-do.
Warmer than yesterday.
Not really.
I've seen colder places, colder days.
I guess.
Sit by yourself.
Got winter flip flops.
Seriously.
While we're bored.
I assumed to be a
You
big
get a
song,
look.
right?
How long was it since you got it? How long ago since you got it? Just,
She texted me yesterday morning.
okay, so just, go figure. Right.
Are you willing to pay that for
Maybe today I would.
Yeah.
No kidding. Oh, that's so cute. That's too bad. It is. Delivery.
I like the sauce. The sauce is just like,
Yes.
it's very crafty.
Dylan, do you need that?
Does anybody need a cookie dough?
Bonnie, I like their color, Bonnie.
Ronnie? You have no idea, I just couldn't sleep, I was so Bonnie deprived.
So, Bonnie deprived? Well, I think the camera's tilted, that's why I'm thinking, what's going on? Yeah, I thought he'd let Shelley join us for a while. Seems everybody's kind of over there. I'm going to just move this over there. All right, good evening, everyone, and those of you who are joining us online, welcome. If I hack and cough a bit, it's minus 30 and my lungs don't like it, so it's not. I don't have COVID or anything like that. I just no, I'm good. So just so you know. Last week, someone mentioned that as they watch that, they can't always hear you when you talk, and that makes sense because the mic is right in front of me. So I'm going to get a second USB mic and plop it on the table so that people can hear your comments, because you contribute a great deal, and it's nice to get all of your thoughts and opinions with this. So it's not just a kind of my voice, but so if you are speaking up tonight, speak up nice and loud, but the odds are the mic still won't pick you up. So, but I will get a radius or a mic in your general direction. So. All right. Just when you thought it was safe to get out of the water and say, Zechariah is finally making sense, guess what?
Back into the deep end.
Back in the, but a different pool altogether. We are at the back half of Zechariah. We've got through the prophetic images, and now we move tonight into Zechariah 9 to 11 and 12. We won't do 12 to 14, obviously, just 9 to 11. This section's I've entitled Deliverance and Destruction. And if you look just on the graphic, and hopefully if you're watching us online, you were able to download those. This is from the Bible Project, but 9 and 10 are about the coming king, And then 11 is about the rejection of that coming king. So it's this great promise of the coming king, and then it's balanced off by the rejection. And then 12 through 14, which we'll look at the new year, is the power and the return and the glory of the Messianic kingdom. So today we're going to look at a set of contrasts back and forth, which is really kind of the theme of all of this. All right. If you can remember from your high school days, someone, and I will turn the camera so that they can all see you and hear you, give me a poem you remember from high school.
Do I have to recite the
Just a
poem?
portion of it, or just the title or anything about a poem you remember
The
from high school.
Flanders Fields.
In Flanders Field where poppies grow, between the crosses, row on row. Good. Anybody else a poem you remember from high school?
Yes, I read Rudyard
What's that one, Bonnie?
Kipling. There was a poem, yep, isn't there? Yep.
It?
If.
Oh, if. Do you remember any of the lines from it? All right. Anybody else? Joyce, any of your poetry days are coming back to you?
I honestly can't remember. I know there was some.
Shelley, anything from your days?
There was something called, I think, the Highwayman.
No. Yeah.
Riding.
Yeah.
If you can keep your head all about are losing theirs and blaming it on you.
Is that Invictus?
It's Rudyard Kipling.
Yeah. Doug, any poems from your world?
Roses are red.
What are
Something.
what are some of the keys to understanding poetry?
Patterns.
Patterns. Good.
Repetition.
Repetition of theme, image, color. Yeah.
Symbolism.
Structure, symbolism. Good. Symbolism. Yes. Roses are red, violets are blue.
John Deere is green.
John Deere is green, and I like you too. Shakespeare writes, shall I compare thee to a summer's day, for thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease has often too short of date. Sometimes too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. But every fair from fairest time declines by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But as long as men shall breathe and I shall see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee.
Did you practice that?
I memorized that in high school, and it's stuck with me all the years.
Was that like a pickup line you used? or-
Yeah, it's a great line to meet chicks. Yeah. Hey, it worked. So it's symbolism, structure, all right? What's the difference between the symbolism of poetry and the symbolism of apocalyptic literature? That's a head scratcher. Yeah, well, probably that. So I have good news and bad news. The bad news is we're done with the apocalyptic images. The good news is we're moving into poetry. This whole next section is poetry. And I thought, why couldn't we just stick with the straightforward stuff from last week?
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah, it was so simple. Well, these chapters, 9 through 11, are a series of poems that he writes. So we move from one ambiguous, fuzzy structure, apocalyptic writing, to a little pause, and now we're into another ambiguous, fuzzy structure called poetry. So sorry about that, but we're into poetry. All right, this is the poetic fold, and the kicker is we don't know the date of this event or a lot of what he's talking about. It's poetry. Just for your reference point, in your notes it says chapters 1 through 8 are quoted often in the book of Revelation, while chapters 9 through 14 are quoted in the Gospels. Two things for you as we begin. First off, peel off this page. You're going to need that, these 4 columns, and set that somewhere. Secondly, you will see these 2 pages at the end. Everybody got that? These are all the direct quotes and what we call allusions. Not illusions like a magic trick, but allusions are a reference to Zechariah. So the first few are where it's directly quoted. 8:16, Ephesians 4:25, 9:9, Matthew. These are ones. But allusions and what we call verbal parallels, things that strike up, these are all the ones here. And if you look, Matthew, James, and then all of a sudden it hits Revelation. Yeah, all the way to here, all these center ones. Revelation loves Zechariah. And then it goes a bit into Corinthians, Ephesians, Matthew, and the Gospels, but then back to Revelation again, and then Matthew, and then the last 4 are Revelation again. So you'll see that, this is just for your own reading, we're not going to go through them all. You'll see that Revelation loves Zechariah. All right. We're not really sure the people that are being judged in this chapter who really are. It could be the Greeks, it could be the Phoenicians, it could be, we're really not sure. A guy named H.C. Leopold assumes Zechariah 1 to 10 is Alexander the Great, while 11 to 17 is the Maccabeans, but we simply don't know. What this is, though, is a set of either paradox or contrasts between God's righteousness and their injustice. So tonight, as we study, what I call here is a series of poetic contrasts, black and white images. So here's the project for tonight. You have in front of you these four page with 4 columns on it. As we go through these chapters, and we're going to move through them fairly quickly, what I want you to see is really what this is actually 2. It's God's blessing and God's punishment. Or God's punishment and God's blessing, depends on how you look at it. So what I want you to mark down is, first off, what actions, behaviors, people, who does God condemn and why? It could be idolatry. It could be they've forgotten me. It could be whatever it is. But as we go through, just jot to yourself, what does God... So off the top of your head, what does God condemn? Idolatry. Lying. Murder. Stealing. All these things. Thou shalt not... Kill. All of that, right. So God condemns all these, right? And then in the in this second column, how does God punish those things? What does he do in retaliation? So if your child steals, what do you do as parents?
Make him give it back.
Make him give it back.
Say the story.
Say the story. Sure, you have actions, right? So when I was in school, because I was a very energetic boy, they used to make me sit on my hands for 20 minutes to half an hour at a time, because I was fairly high energy. I told somebody, they said, it was 1969. That's how we did things back then, you know. Now they'd give you a wiggly chair and a ball and some Ritalin and you'd be fine. Yeah, Ritalin, you'd be fine. Back in those days, they made you sit on your hands. So there's punishment. So what you do is, what is it that God's condemning, and then what is the punishment or the consequence, which is really the theme of this chapter. Then on the opposite side, the next column 3, what does God bless, and what does God bless? What's that, Shelley? Obedience, faithfulness, all these things, right? And then, how does God reward? What does God do? Make sense? Any questions about the 4 columns? Bad consequences, good consequences. And this will be the heart of the lesson tonight as we go through this chapter. So I'm going to leave that up to you as we go along to make notes. I'm not going to coach you the answers. Welcome to adult education. You are on your own for this one. And then we will look at a central theme. And I don't want to show my hand too early in the evening. All right, let us pick it up in Zechariah chapter 9. We're going to read some big chunks of scripture tonight, so you got your reading glasses, I hope, Dan? Good. We continue in Zechariah, the second last book of the Old Testament, starting in chapter 9, verse 1. And if you have a Bible like mine, you know it's poetry because it's all columnized. All right, Donna, verse 1.
The burden of the word of the Lord is against the land of Hadrach, with Damascus as its resting place, for the eyes of men, especially of all the tribes of Israel, are toward the Lord.
All right, so the burden of the Lord. That's why we know it's a new section. This is a new prophecy, the burden of the Lord. That gives us an indication. And he's looking at who? Who is this burden about?
The land of Hadrach.
The land of Hadrach
And upon Damascus.
and the people of Damascus. All right, what do you know about Damascus?
They make really cool barrels for guns.
I guess they do, yeah, and steel. But who had an encounter on the road? Paul. Paul's on the way to Damascus, right? So it's in the neighborhood of Jerusalem. Hadrach is the northernmost geographical area of the Promised Land. It'd be like saying Uranium City or the far north. All the way down to the Syrian capital of Damascus. So he's talking about the areas to the north. He's making reference to the land of Israel, those northern tribes. And he says, for the eyes of men. It literally means for the eyes of Adam or the eyes of man. And what is all man looking at?
The Lord.
The Lord. They're focusing on the covenant relationship with God. So this whole thing is going to be about what does it mean to live in relationship to God, right? What does it mean to live in covenant with God? So, what is a covenant?
Agreed upon contract.
Right. And what is the covenant that Israel has with God?
God and every people.
Right. Ethan, you said?
Blessings and curses.
Blessings and curses. Their theme is already weaving itself through this evening. The covenant was all about, I will be your God, and you will be my people. I will bless you, and if you don't, punish you. Right, that's our 4 columns, right? This is a conditional covenant. Conditional upon what?
Their obedience.
Their obedience. If they disobey, what happens to the covenant? It will be broken, and there will be consequences. Dylan, your new word, consequences.
New word.
The word of the night is consequence. So this whole poetry section is focusing on the covenant relationship God has with them, on the blessings and the curses, and on the conditional nature of it. And its central figure. All right, verse 2. Singing's doing great. Donna, pick it up.
And Hamath also, which borders on it, Tyre and Sidon, though they are very wise.
In other words, these northern places. Hamath is in the north, and Tyre and Sidon are on the coastline to the north. So everything's north of Jerusalem. We're talking about the northern people. All right, you're doing great, Donna. Verse 3.
For Tyre built herself a fortress and piled up silver like dust and gold like the mire of the streets.
So Tyre's on the coastline. It's a fortress city. It's the one the Romans eventually would conquer by building a big ramp. And he's prophesying. And Tyre is one of the 5 cities of the Philistines. And who are the Philistines?
Giants.
Giants. Yes, they hire giants. Goliath is a Philistine, right? These are the people that came from the Mediterranean, landed, built these fortified cities, and they are a pain in Israel's side. Who goes off to fight them all the time? David's constantly fighting the Philistines. So they are bad. And then pick it up, Joni, verse 4 and 5.
But the Lord will take away her possessions and destroy her power on the sea, and she will be consumed by fire.
Good. So what's going to happen to her?
Fire.
Fire. And throw it into the sea, because there are people on the coastline, right? Pick it up, Joni, verse 5.
Ashkelon
Yep.
will see it and fear. Gaza will writhe in agony, and Ekron too. For her hope will wither. Gaza will lose her king, and Ashkelon will be deserted.
All right, if you are filling out the column that says consequences, what's happening? What's going to happen to these nations?
Agony.
Agony.
Fire.
Fire. Thrown into the sea. Writhing in great pain. The king will perish. The city will not be inhabited. So these are all the consequences of being outside the covenant. For those who are outside the covenant of God, what happens?
There's agony and fire.
Writhing in great pain. Just put that in a pin in your brain. For those outside the covenant, they will writhe in great pain. Does this sound familiar at all? Those outside the city, those outside the covenant, those outside the blessing, those outside Jerusalem, nothing but pain and agony and suffering. Right? We're getting images. All right. Dylan, verse 6 and 7.
Foreigners will occupy Ashdod, and I will cut off the pride of the Philistines.
Good. Does anybody else have the word besides foreigners? There's a better word there. That's
Mongrel.
a mongrel race. Yeah, just a bunch of nobodies, right? It's a great image, the mongrel race. And what are they going to do?
I will take the blood from their mouths, the forbidden food from between their teeth. Those who are left will belong to our God and become leaders in Judah, and Ekron will be like the Jebusites.
All right, so what's he going to actually do to their... If you take the blood out of your mouth, what happens to you? What does that mean? Someone whose blood is pouring out of their mouth.
They cut their tongue out.
They could be cut their tongue out, or they're They're bleeding internally. They're dying, right? He says, I'm going to take the blood out of their mouth. They're dying. This is poetry, right? This isn't roses are red. This is tongues are red kind of poetry. It's rather graphic, actually. And they're detestable things from between their teeth. They're eating idolatrous food that they aren't supposed to. What's God going to do? He's going to literally
Lost their teeth.
he's going to like a child who's eating a live frog. He just reaches in and pulls it out of their mouth and says, "Don't eat that. That's bad." He's going to remove their idolatry, is what he's saying. And then verse 7.
I read it. I'm reading.
The last end of verse 7. And then
Those who are left will belong to our God and become leaders in Judah. And Ekron will be like the Jebusites.
the Jebusites were original Canaanite inhabitants of the city of Jebus, also called Salem, which became Jerusalem. Yeah. So the Jebusites are the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And when David conquered the Jebusite city, what did they become? The people that were there. His subjects. So in the midst of this bloody darkness, there's what? A little bit of hope. Those who aren't purged and killed will become
Insiders.
Yeah, they will become obedient. They will become the remnant. They will become those who remain. So there's a tiny bit of hope in this. Even for the most despicable. Once God is done purging, what's left? Those that, what's that, Donna? The remnant that will serve him and know him. Yeah, become subject to him. All right, we're doing great. So overall, what's the news for the people of the north in verses 1 through 7?
Not good.
Trouble.
Fire! That's right. Bad news. Bloody mouths and bad news. God will purge and punish. If you are outside of the covenant, what hope is there? Not much. That's the first. Zechariah is going to push this hard, that if you are outside the covenant, there is very little hope. There's a little hope, but very little. So what should that motivate them to do? Change. Get in the covenant. This isn't a case of, well, you're doomed. It's, no, you need to get in and under the covenant. And then the good news starts, because verse 8, Danny.
But I will defend my house against marauding forces. Never again will an oppressor overrun my people, for now I am keeping watch.
Good. For now I have, interesting, hey? If you compare the end of verse 8 to the end of verse 1, for the eyes of men are towards the Lord, and then God says, my eyes are towards them. Now it turns, right? Everyone's looking to what God's doing, the horror that he's doing, and God says, and when I turn and my eyes come towards you, what's the good that's going to happen? This is now, we're moving into the first other section of your page. What's God going to do to those who his eyes are upon? What's that? Protect them. I will camp around them, right? And because of him who passes by and returns, those remnants that come back, he's talking to the people of the north. And then we get the great verse. Ethan, you can sing a Christmas carol with verse 9.
Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you, righteous and having salvation is he. Humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, full of donkey.
Sorry, not Christmas. What holiday?
Easter.
Passover. Behold, he comes riding. No, that's not it.
Here comes
Jesus riding on a donkey. Hosanna, Hosanna. Yes, this is the prophecy
Is
here.
that your jumping up and down song?
That is the jumping up and down
I
song.
found that on YouTube the other day.
Oh, did you? Good.
Gold and gray were so small.
This is used in Matthew 21:5 and John 12:15. Now, what is the significance of him riding on a donkey? Let's take a look. Donkeys were the royal mount of kings. Let's take a look at a few of these verses. 2 Samuel 13:29. Bonnie. Doug, 2 Samuel 16:2. Shelley, 2 Samuel 18:9. And Joyce, 1 Kings 1:33 through 34, and then 38 and 44. Joyce can pick those up. Let's take a look. 2 Samuel 13:29. Bonnie.
The servants of Absalom
did to Amnon, just as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons rose, each mounted his mule and fled.
Good. So the king's sons ride donkeys. Doug. We'll give you a moment. 2 Samuel 16:2. 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel.
First Samuel what?
2 Samuel 16:2.
That's surprising, I've never noticed that. Donkeys are for the king.
Donkeys are for kings.
16:2.
Yes, please.
The king asked Ziba, "Why have you brought these?" Ziba answered, "The donkeys are for the king's household to ride on, the bread and fruit are for the men to eat, and the wine is to refresh those who become exhausted in the desert."
Good. So the donkeys are for
King.
the kings. Shelley. 18:9.
18:9. Now Absalom happened to know David's man, he was riding his mule, and as the mule went under the branches of the lion's coat, Absalom said, caught him. He was left hanging in midair while the mule was riding.
Yikes.
Not the best story, but a good example. Yes, Absalom's riding his donkey, and there's a tree branch, and he gets his neck caught in the tree branch. The donkey goes on, and he hangs. So, Joyce, 1 Kings 33, 34, and then 38 and 44.
Sorry, what was the chapter?
1 Kings 30, 1 Kings 1.
Yeah. 1 Kings 1.
33 and 34.
He said unto them, take your horse which you have set Solomon my son on my own mule, and take it down to Gihon.
Good. So take your what? Take your horse, but put my son on a mule. Good. And then 38 and 44.
34.
Oh, sure.
There hath Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet anoint him king over Israel. Blow the trumpet and shout, long live King Solomon.
So Solomon rode a donkey when he got anointed. And then 38 and 44.
So Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, Benaiah son of Jehoiada, the Cherethites, and the Pelethites went down and put Solomon on King David's mule and escorted him to Gihon.
So he rides King David's mule. And then 44.
The king has sent with him Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, Benaiah son of Jehoiada, and the Jerizzites and the Pelethites.
Don't worry, but you're doing great.
They put him on the king's mule.
Okay, that's the point. So what do kings ride? They don't ride horses, which is weird, because what would you expect a king to ride?
Something noble.
Something noble. So this vision of these kings, like these little donkeys, mules, just like you think of the mules we had in the barn, and kings they ride them.
But a mule's more utility, right? Like a mule's tougher.
Yeah, and you can go different. It's like the four-wheel drive truck of the world, the KLR 650 of the world.
Yeah.
But they were a symbol of royalty. However, the colt of a donkey was used because only the king could ride on this donkey. Therefore, this would be the first time the colt was ridden when Jesus rides. This whole idea that Jesus comes, and what's the significance of the donkey?
Well, he has a big cross on his back.
Okay, that'll help.
So I'm
Yeah.
sure that that's something
Yep.
significant.
What else about donkeys? What is God telling kings?
They're not all that.
They're not all that in a bag of chips, right? Get off your high horse. You're riding. Jewish kings were humble. They just drove minivans. Like they weren't driving Mercedes, right? I think partly noted significance is that God wanted kings to be humble and ride utilitarian, because they could have ridden horses, chariots, right? Like all the other kings. But God keeps them humble, and I think it was a note of their humility. So, ride it on. And so what does Jesus come? Humble,
Riding on a donkey.
riding on a donkey, even the colt, the foal of a donkey. So this is good. And then verse 10, where are we at for who's reading?
Bonnie.
Bonnie, verse 10.
Yeah.
Sorry, back to Zechariah 9.
I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim, and the horse from Jerusalem, and the bow of war will be cut
Who rides a horse? What are horses for? War. Because horses were weapons.
Condemns horses.
What's that?
Condemns horses.
God condemns horses in this only because horses are weapons of war, and the king who rode the horse was the warrior, the war leader. The king who rode the donkey was peacekeeper. Excellent. So to come on a horse or a chariot, God says, I'm going to cut them off because that is a sign of war. But the Messiah, the good king, comes riding the symbol of peace. Right? That's the significance. Now, just for our illusion as Canadians, what is written on the Peace Tower? And his dominion shall be from sea to sea. Yeah, this is written on the Peace Tower. Yeah. And from the river to the ends of the earth. So, just a nice little Canadian note in there.
Where's the Dominion Tower?
What's that, Danny?
The Dominion Tower?
Oh, the Peace Tower, the clock tower at Parliament.
Oh.
The big clock tower that's there in the middle. That's right on the front of the clock tower. You can see it up high.
You think Trudeau believes that?
Oh, no.
That God would have dominion over the lands and from the seas to the rivers. Yeah, I'll leave that there, but it is there.
Yeah, didn't Trudeau do away with any religious?
Yeah, you can't get away from the House of Parliament.
Yeah.
There's a book about, there's lots of verses inscribed in the stonework on the House of Parliament. There's a whole book written on it. So. All right, so what is God going to do? And what is the sign of his blessing?
Kings that ride donkeys,
Kings that ride donkeys, which are
peacekeepers
will rule.
yeah.
A peaceful king will rule. Those who are in the covenant will experience what from their king? Peace. Those who are outside the covenant will experience what from their king? War. Okay. The sign of God's blessing upon a nation is peace and a peaceful king. All right, we're doing great. Pick it up, verse 11. This whole section now, 11 through 17, is one big long poem about blessing. So get your blessing column warmed up and your blessing pen warmed up. Well, who is up to reading now next? Doug, you get 11 through 13.
As for you, because of the blood of my covenant with you, I will free your prisoners from the waterless pit.
I'll just stop there. What's the first thing God will do under the covenant? Free the prisoners. Good. Keep going, Doug. 12.
Return to your fortress, O prisoners of hope. Even now I announce that I will restore twice as much to you.
Good. Sorry. So what is God going to do to those prisoners? He's going to restore. Good. Sorry, Doug. I don't mean to keep interrupting you, but it's good. 13.
I will bend Judah as I bend my bow and fill it with Ephraim. I will rouse your sons of Zion against your sons of Greece, and make you like a warrior's sword.
Okay, here's the strange thing. This is this dichotomy. One section we're talking about the King of Peace, and now he's talking about
Making a sword.
making a sword out of who?
People.
People. In order to defeat who?
More people.
But who are the people?
Greece.
The Greeks, right. That's why some people believe this is about Alexander the Great. That Israel would be able to defend themselves against Alexander the Great. So, what's the sign of God's blessing? Defense against your enemies. Good. No, 14, Doug.
Then the Lord will appear over them. His arrow will flash like lightning. The sovereign Lord will sound the trumpet. He will march in the storms of the south.
Keep going, verse 15.
The Lord Almighty will shield them. They will destroy and overcome with sling stones. They will drink and roar as with wine. They will be full like a bowl, used for sprinkling the corners of the altar.
This is a great image, by the way. God will defend them, and they will devour and trample on the sling stones. They just get these rocks that'll go flying, right? And they will drink and be boisterous as with wine. But what are they drinking? Yeah, the blood of their enemies, basically, right? And they will be filled, because what's the sacrificial basin filled with? Blood, right? They'll be filled with the blood of their enemies. It's a very graphic image. Drenched like the corners of the altar with blood, because they're going to defeat their enemies. All right, Doug, I won't interrupt. 16 and 17.
The Lord their God will save them on that day as the flock of his people. They will sparkle in his land like jewels in
Good. Grain will make the young men flourish and wine the virgins, it says, right? That,
See, wine is for girls and beer is for boys.
yeah, that's right. Grain, barley for the boys. Yeah, there's a country song about that, I think. That's more about horses, though. All right, so what's the image here? I know this is poetic, but what is he speaking of?
Sounds pretty good to be on God's side.
It
And
is.
just your eternity, like jewels in.
Yeah, that's the image that we get, that all these jewels, precious jewels. It comes from this passage, by the way. Yeah. What does all this speak to? Eternity and victory, right? Victory over your enemies, joy, boisterousness. It's a very loud, expressive passage, but it's all about the victory of God. Those who are in the covenant are victorious. Those outside the covenant, losers, are defeated. All right, we're making good progress. That's God's blessing. Chapter 10. How are we doing for time? All right, we're doing great. I should have got Doug to read this one, but this is an imperative. Shelley, do you want to read chapter 10, verse 1?
Ask the Lord for rain and fruit from him. It is the Lord who makes the storm clouds. He gives showers of rain to men and plants of the field.
So those inside the covenant get what? Rain. We're not going to take that. Verse 2, Shelley?
The idle speak deceit, diviners see visions that lie. They tell dreams that are false, they give comfort in vain. Therefore the people wander like sheep, go grass along with the shepherd.
All right, this whole chapter now, this poetry, is a series of drum beats, like bang, 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 back and forth opposites, right? There's noise and silence, and it's blessing and cursing, blessing and cursing. So the first blessing is those inside the covenant are blessed by rain and food. Those outside the covenant are false prophets, right? They speak iniquity, the diviners see lying visions, and the people, the consequences, the people wander like sheep. So those who obey are blessed with rain. Those who don't get bad prophets. That they get cursed, lying prophets. Okay? So when you see this, you'll see a series of back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So 3 now goes to a negative, 4 goes to a positive. Joyce.
My anger burns against the shepherds, and I will punish the leaders, for the Lord Almighty will care for his flock, the house of Judah, and make them like a proud horse in battle. From Judah will come the cornerstone, from him the tent peg, from him the battle bow, from him every ruler.
Good. So what's God going to do against the false shepherds? Punish the leaders. He calls them male goats. And to those who are inside the covenant, they're going to be like majestic horses in battle. They'll be a cornerstone, a tent peg. What are all the images in verse 4 implying?
Isn't it the cornerstone?
Yes, which implies what? Yeah, that's Jesus. You're right, Joyce. But what does the image imply?
Fire.
No, fire. Building.
Temple?
No, close.
Foundation.
Love. Strength, right? Stability.
God.
Okay, a cornerstone is strong and stable, right? What does a tent peg do?
It holds there.
It anchors. What does a cornerstone do? It anchors the building. So they anchor, right? So this people will be anchored and stable. Fire, Jesus. It's good. This is good. All right.
It's late.
It's all linked. It'll all come down to it. It always comes down to Jesus. Don't worry. Your answers are completely right. It's just we're not there
It's
yet.
not right now.
That's not right now. That's right. Every ruler, yes, trust me, it comes down to Jesus. All right. Verse 5, Joyce.
Together they will be like mighty men, trampling the muddy streets in battle. Because the Lord is with them, they will fight and overthrow the horsemen.
Is there a mother part there? Okay, you don't get on the riders and the horses will be put to shame? It's interesting though your translation, because the closer translation says, treading down the enemy in the mud of the streets of battle. So what's the image there? You're stepping on the bodies of your enemy and pushing them down into the mud. Trampling.
It's like rain again.
Yeah, it's more like rain, but this is treading down the enemy in the mire of the streets and stepping on their heads.
I wish somebody pushed me in the mud.
Yeah, and the riders on the horses will be put to shame. All right, good. All right, we're back to Donna, verse 6.
Okay, and I will strengthen the house of Judah, and I will save the house of Joseph, and I shall bring them back, because I have had compassion on them. And they will be as though I had not rejected them, for I am the Lord their God, and I will answer them.
Okay, so what is God going to do? He's going to
Bring them back.
and
Strengthen,
strengthen them and
have compassion.
have compassion on them. This is a great verse, by the way. And answer them, right? You'll hear their prayers. Okay, so in contrast to stepping on the heads of your enemies down into the mud and the horses being put to shame, they will be strengthened and saved and be returned, and God will hear them and have compassion on them. And then he picks it up in verse 7, Donna.
And Ephraim will be like a mighty man, and their heart will be glad as if from wine. Indeed, their children will see it and be glad. Their heart will rejoice in the Lord.
By the way, if you want to know the Old Testament's view on wine, it's always happy. It's always, they'll be happy with the wine, and the virgins will drink wine, and they'll be good with wine. There's always the Bible speaks very highly of wine and its effects. That indeed their children will see it, which means the blessing of generations to come, family. Yeah, exactly. And their heart will rejoice. And then I love verse 8, Jody.
I will signal for them and gather them in. Surely I will redeem them. They will be as numerous as before.
Okay, does anybody have a different word than signal?
Whistle.
Whistle, right. Because this is the image of the shepherd, right? Yeah, he's whistling. I can't do that very well. But he's whistling and they come running home. They're like the sheep. This is the constant image here. And they will be, and the sheep, what do sheep do by nature? Scatter. So he's going to bring them back. And then you put sheep together, what happens?
Reproduce.
Then you get more sheep, right? And they will be numerous as they were before. Good. All right, Dylan, verse 9.
Though I scatter them among the peoples, yet in distant lands they will remember me. They and their children will survive, and they will return.
Good, verse 10.
I will bring them back from Egypt and gather them from Syria. I will bring them to Gilead and Lebanon, and there will not be enough room for them.
Good, so what happens under the blessings of God? Multiply and come home. Everybody gets to come home, big reunion. Good. Danny, verse 11 and 12.
They will pass through the sea of trouble, the surging sea will be subdued, and all the depths of the Nile will dry up. Syria's pride will be brought down, and Egypt's scepter will pass away. I will strengthen them in the Lord, and in his name they will walk.
All right, so do you see the contrasting set of images here? Israel's going to be blessed and return, and what's going to happen to their enemies? Who's the king of Egypt? Today.
Oh, today.
Nobody, right? There's no king of Egypt anymore. It's all gone, right? The scepters of Egypt is gone. Assyria has been defeated. Assyria now is in ruins, right? But what's he going to do to the people of Israel? So your pen should be just flying now. The enemy's defeated. Assyria is gone. And God's people will be strengthened and blessed. All right, we're doing great. One last chapter. So he's talked about military victory, he's talked about economic victory, he's talked about family victory, he's talked about a strengthened people, he's talked about defeat of the enemies. What hasn't he talked about yet? He's talked about economics, family, society, cities, war. What piece of our lives is missing? The spiritual side. Good. Excellent, Donna. Verse 11 now returns to this. Because what is a covenant relationship with God without a spiritual blessed life? Chapter 11 picks it up. Ethan, 11, let's go 1 through 3 because it's one poem.
Open your doors, O Lebanon, that the fire may devour your cedars. Wail, O cypress, for the cedars fallen, for the glorious trees are ruined. Wail, oaks of Bashan, for the thick forest has been felled. The sound of the wail of the shepherds, for their glory is ruined. The sound of the roar of the lions, for the thicket of the Jordan is ruined.
Good. So what's on the flag of Lebanon right now? Do you know what's in the middle picture? There's trees. The cedars of Lebanon. And what does God say is going to happen to Lebanon? Other side of the column, right? Burn. He will fire, fire, fire. He's going to burn the cedars of Lebanon.
Is there any place in that land that has trees? Like
Not
all
anymore.
stone? Yes.
It's all, yeah, it's pretty much gone. Yeah.
They talked, they must have one time been very much.
That's right, because the temple was built with cedars from Lebanon. Yeah. We have to remember that at one time Israel had lions prowling around.
Yes.
You know, there were animals there that aren't there anymore, right? So, all right. Bonnie, 4-6.
Thus says the Lord my God, pasture the flock doomed to slaughter. Those who buy them slay them and go unpunished. And each of those who sell them says, Blessed be the Lord, for I have become rich. And their own shepherds have no pity on them. For I no longer have pity on the inhabitants of the land, declares the Lord. But behold, I will cause the men to fall, each into another's power, and into the power of his king. And they will strike the land, and I will not deliver them from their hand.
What happens to those outside the covenant when Israel stepped out of the covenant?
God didn't protect them.
They were like what? Slaves, like sheep being sold to the slaughter, right? He says there, I have no pity. The shepherds have no pity. I have no pity on the inhabitants. He compares them to the sheep, and ultimately he actually says into slavery, into another power, the power of the kings, and I will strike their land. He's not going to rescue them anymore, right? If you step outside the covenant, you step outside God's protection, and bad things happen. So then verse 7. Who's the I? Well, the I is the Messiah, the one who's to come. And now we pick up, in contrast, to hope. Verse 7 and 8, Doug.
Yeah, they're done.
Stop laughing. So I pastured the flock marked for slaughter, particularly the oppressed of the flock. Then I took 2 staffs and called one favor and the other union, and I pastured the flock. In 1 month I got rid of the 3 shepherds. The flock detested me, and I grew weary of them, and said, I will not be your shepherd. Let the dying die, and the perishing perish. Let those who are left eat one another's flesh.
All right, we'll stop there. Couple of things. In Psalm 23, David says, thy rod and staff. Right? Shepherds carried 2 staffs. One large crooked neck staff to control the sheep, and one war club to beat off the predators, right? So he's carrying here 2 large crooked neck staff. One called pleasantness, and one is called union. And he's trying to bring Israel and Judah back together again, but they refused. This is where it gets, no one really knows what the 3 shepherds are. There are about 40 theories available as to who the 3 shepherds in verse 8 are in 1 month. No idea. Needless to say, though, God destroys the false shepherds. And what does he leave them to? Those who are going to die, let them die. Those who are annihilated, let them be annihilated. If you don't follow the good shepherd and follow a false shepherd, what's going to happen to you? Destruction. Yeah. Bad.
But it's so opposite of this going after the one lost sheep.
Right. Because it's the shepherds who are causing the problem. In that parable, it's the good shepherd, right? He's talking about the bad shepherds, and these people are following the bad shepherds. He says, if you follow a bad shepherd, you will find yourself. And the consequences of following a bad shepherd, those who die, die. And those who are lost will remain lost. And that's why this whole image of, what is Jesus, one of his favorite names for himself? I am the good shepherd. And he will. This image of the good shepherd will come into play quite strong here. Okay, where did we... What is die? Okay, verse 10, Shelley, 10 and 11.
Then I took my staff called favor and broke it, and broke the covenant I had made with all the nations. It was revoked on that building, and so the afflicted of the flock who were watching and knew it was the word of the Lord.
This is one of the most painful passages in all the Old Testament. Because what does God do? He breaks the covenant. He says, because you have betrayed me, he takes the staff of favor and he breaks the covenant with Israel. I want to read you a couple of verses, because this idea of the Mosaic covenant is often portrayed as sheep and shepherd, but other times it's portrayed as husband and wife. God is the husband and Israel is the wife. So, Joyce, do you want to turn to Isaiah 50, verse 1? and Donna, Jeremiah 3:8. We can read the whole context, but these are two key verses which often don't get read.
This is what the Lord says, where is your mother's certificate of divorce, with which I sent her away? Or to which of my creditors did I tell you, because of your sins you were sold, because of your transgressions your mother was sent away?
Good. So, the image is of God being married to Israel, the northern tribes. And what does he do? He divorces her. He says, where is the certificate of divorce which I issued to? Because they've lost it, obviously. And he said, I sold her to the creditors. So God says, I divorced Israel. All right, turn to Jeremiah 3, verse 8.
And I saw that for all the adulteries of faithless Israel, I had sent her away and given her a writ of divorce. Yet her treacherous sister Judah did not fear, but she went and was a harlot also.
Good. So what does God say he did with the northern tribes? He divorced them. Later on, Michael will say God hates divorce. Why?
That's what it's all like.
Because he knows like God's been divorced. God hates divorce because God's been divorced. That's a very image we don't often talk about. When we talk about the issues of divorce, we don't often read these verses. But God says, I gave you the certificate of divorce because you were unfaithful to me. And where, don't you see what happened to your sister? I divorced her. And how come you don't get it? You still act like a harlot. So I think one of the reasons God hates divorce is because God was divorced. And he understands what it's like. Now, why does he divorce her?
Unfaithful.
Because they were unfaithful. Who violated the covenant first? She did. And the image of Israel violating the covenant repeatedly. God says, if you don't want to keep this marriage working, we're done. That's a terrifying image, isn't it? All right, let's come to an end here. Back to verse 12. Okay, Shelley's gone. Joyce, are we up to you? Okay, Donna, 12, 13, and 14.
Okey-dokey. And I said to them, if it is good in your sight, give me my wages, but if not, never mind. So they weighed out 30 shekels of silver as my wages. Then the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, that magnificent price at which I was valued by them. So I took the 30 shekels of silver and threw them to the potter in the house of the Lord. Then I cut my second staff, union, in pieces to break the brotherhood between Judah and Israel.
Okay, he's the shepherd who's watching over them, and what does he ask for? Yeah, he asked for his severance pay because he quits. He says, you don't want me to be your shepherd. You're following these bad shepherds. So I said to them, if it's good in your sight, give me my wages. But if not, never mind. So they say, fine, and they pay him his severance pay. They give him his 30 pieces of silver, and he takes that money, which is his severance, and what does he do with it? He throws it away, right? Like it's like they fired him from his job, they give him his severance, he says, fine on you, and he takes the money and throws it in the mud. Right? But we know, what is this a reference to? Judas. This is Judas, yeah. And again, Zechariah is the book the New Testament constantly refers to. 30 pieces of silver, and he throws it to the potters. The term shekels is this whole idea. This is Judas, right? Throw it to the potter. All right, and he breaks the union. In other words, the brotherhood between Judah and Israel, the 10 and the 2, are now being divided. Although this is poetry, it's referring to a real event. This destruction of union. And then it all wraps up in 15 through 17. Joni!
Then the Lord said to me, take again the equipment of a foolish shepherd, for I am going to raise up a shepherd over the land who will not care for the lost, or seek the young, or heal the injured, or feed the healthy, but will eat the meat of the choice sheep, tearing off their hooves. Woe to the worthless shepherd who deserts the flock. May the sword strike his arm and his right eye. May his arm be completely withered, his right eye totally blind.
So he says, remember Hosea got asked to marry Gomer? He says, now, Zechariah, take up the mantle of the foolish shepherd. This almost sounds like a bit of play acting, where Zechariah is asked to pick up this costume and pretend to be the equipment of the foolish shepherd. And it's a metaphor for what? For the bad shepherds yet to come, right? These priests and prophets, these spiritual leaders who would abuse and take advantage of Israel, right? Jesus would say they'll add burden upon burden. They count their mint to their tithe, but they don't care. They don't look after the widows. They don't seek the perishing or seek to scatter the broken or sustain the one standing, but they devour the fat of the sheep. And right down, how much do they eat? Everything down to the hooves, right? Like they eat the whole leg. They're just going to eat the whole thing except the unedible parts. Woe the worthless shepherd. And what happens to them? What a great image, though, right? The sword will cut off their right arm, gouge out their right eye, and will wither that. What happened to all those priests and prophets and all those people that lived during Jesus' time? They were destroyed, right? When 70 AD came along and the Romans destroyed them, they scattered to the four winds. And to this day, there are no longer any priests in Israel. All these years later, right? They're scattered to the winds because there's no temple anymore. So the prophecy that was given here, that occurred in 70 AD, here we are in 2022, almost 2023, that prophecy is still coming to pass. All right, before we draw this to a close, any thoughts or questions about those big chapters? I know we moved through a lot of material tonight.
What if it means that I'm going to raise up a shepherd?
Which verse?
16.
Yes. For I'm going to raise up a shepherd in the land who will
not care for those. I will raise him up.
God brings about those bad, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, that.
Man, that's always so bizarre.
Yeah.
That's not
I'm
referring
going to
to
raise him up.
the mark of the beast.
No.
Tiny stuff?
This is time of Jesus, yeah, because this is all in the context of Jesus' life, right? Okay, but why did he raise up the false shepherds? Because the sheep wouldn't follow the good shepherd. These sheep refused, he whistled, they refused to come. They refused to listen to him. He says, I will send you a shepherd, all right, but he'll be a bad shepherd. And what should that make the sheep want to do? Go back to the good shepherd, right? He sends them a bad shepherd so that you'll want to go to a good shepherd, right? Because what does he want them to be?
Sheep, ba, ba, ba.
Good sheep. Good. All right, so on your page of 4 columns now, you should have blessings and cursings. You should have God's desire, and then we'll wrap this to a close. It's 25 after. Anybody just want to read a few off your page? I'm not expecting you, because there's probably lots there. But
A lot of repetition, I thought.
yes, a lot of repetition.
I have more in the columns, not so many on who or what does God condemn and who or what does God bless, but I've got more in the result columns.
And what are some of them?
In the punish one, well,
Fire.
Consumed, destroy chariot, punish leaders, enemies defeated. God didn't protect them, like sheep to a slaughter, sold into slavery.
It's a pretty dark list, isn't it?
Everything gets given to the
Good.
negative.
Anybody else in that negative column that you've got that Donna hasn't said?
Writhing, pain, burning, anger, no pity, agony.
Yeah.
Divorce.
Divorce. Good. Separation from God, the removal of the covenant. All right, what's the blessing for those in the covenant?
Protection.
Protection. Free the prisoners. King of peace. Rain. Ethan, you had one there?
Strengthen.
Okay.
Anchors us.
Yeah. So, what does God want for his people?
Listen.
To listen,
Stay in the covenant.
to live in the good covenant. The whole design of Scripture is that we would live in the good covenant. And what are the blessings of the good covenant? Rain and land and protection and food and wine and all these huge home and your children and your grandchildren and your enemies defeated. All of this is the blessings of the good covenant. But the problem is that we step outside the covenant, right? So what does God have to do?
Coax you in with a stick.
It is.
Shepherd us.
He shepherds us back. Exactly. Sometimes he makes us experience the bad shepherds. Why? Does he want to punish us and make us feel bad? No. What does he want?
Correct us.
To correct us so that we will Return to the good covenant. It's all about retaining. The whole message of Scripture is the life and the times of people who live in the good covenant. So think about Garden of Eden. What was like life under the first covenant? Pretty good. They had everything they needed, right? Then we get under the Abrahamic covenant with Israel. They go to the land, and what's the land like? Rolling with milk and honey, right? All that you need under the good covenant. And when you read all the laws of the covenant, the poor are protected, the innocent, you're healthy, don't eat worms, all this stuff. Life under the covenant is really good. We get in the New Testament, Jesus ordains the new covenant. This is the new covenant. And what's life under the new covenant? Good. Forgiveness and peace and right relationships, and those visit the sick and the widows in their distress. If there's somebody, it's all this stuff. And the warnings of Scripture is that if you step outside the covenant, trouble.
Tony Evans talks about that a little bit. He did a thing on talking about covenant. He said it's like an umbrella.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that it stops raining, but it stops raining on you.
Exactly.
So you stay under the umbrella.
Yeah. So how do we get back under the first covenant? What allowed Israel to stay under the covenant? The blood of bulls and goats, the sacrificial system, right? What allows us to return and remain in the covenant?
Obedience, repentance.
Repentance, the blood of Christ, right? Jesus, the Lamb. The purpose of the Lamb was to bring us and to restore us into covenant. I want to wrap this up. The Westminster Confession, which is a very old confession, which was really just a way of learning things. It'd ask you a question, give you an answer. Begins with this question: what is the chief end of man? Anybody know the rest? To glorify God and enjoy Him forever. That's it. That's our whole purpose. Which basically says, and how do we glorify God? By living under the covenant. And the covenant includes everything from how you eat, to how you dress, to how you treat people. So can you glorify God by wearing clothes? Yes, because you're living under the covenant. Can you glorify God by eating a turkey? Yes, we think of glorifying God as music or worship, right? No, but the covenant is bigger than that. The covenant is how you treat your strangers, how you eat your food, how you wash You glorify God when you wash your hands after you go to the bathroom. That's the covenant command, right? So this whole idea that everything we do, and Paul somebody says, whether you eat or whether you drink, of the glory of God. What?
Everything you do, right?
Everything. So we say, how I eat or drink glorify God? How does me sitting and having coffee with, Ethan glorifying God? It does, because we're living in the covenant together. That's how I glorify God. And so this whole idea is that humanity exists to live in covenant, and covenant is everything. And everything then glorifies God, which also means that you can eat and drink and not glorify God. You could have the healthiest diet in the world and be, whatever, and drink all, just pure, but not glorify God. Why? Because when you're outside the covenant, there's nothing you can do to glorify God. You can follow all the rules and live the best life and do all the good things, but you can't glorify God because you're outside the covenant. Does that make sense? To some extent. Now, yeah, I think I got to be careful there, because you can do good things that would glorify God. But I want to return to the central theme. The central theme of Scripture and the central theme of our lives is that we live in the covenant, and life in the covenant glorifies God. So, go home, drink coffee, be kind to your neighbor, go for a walk, celebrate Christmas, and live in the covenant, which affects every facet of our being, and in doing so, you will glorify God. But woe betide those who don't live in the covenant. And that's where Revelation ends up with. Those outside the city are in suffering because they live outside the covenant. And our goal as a church is to bring people into covenant and that they might experience the blessings of covenant. All right, any thoughts on that? Does that fit? Make sense? All right. Thank you for those of you who joined us online. And we will, there's no study next week, needless to say, because many of you will be gone or tied up with get-togethers, and we will pick up in January.